Hi guys, I'm TheHande's here. So as you have seen in the past, I've done a couple of videos about Finland's presidents, and I kind of wanted to expand this little series where I talk about some of our leaders into talking about also some of our prime ministers. However, the thing is, I've never done a video where I would concisely explain Finland's political system, so I decided that for this video I would try to give a short rundown of how the Finnish Parliament works and how most of our major parties work. Now, Finland obviously has a whole bunch of different political parties, so in this video I'm only going to give summaries of the ones that are currently in the Finnish Parliament. So the Finnish Parliament has 200 seats, elections are held every 4 years, and as is customary in most political systems, the party that gains the most votes usually forms a government. Now, this is an important point, especially for any Anglophone viewers out there, that in Finland it's traditional that the government is formed as a coalition government between two of the three traditional main parties and in addition a bunch of the other smaller parties. And now to go into the actual parties themselves, I'm going to split this into tiers, where I'm first going to be talking about Finland's 4 big parties. Yes, that's right, I said 3 earlier and now 4, and I'll explain why in just a second. Then we'll go into the slightly mid-range parties that are so small that they realistically couldn't be the ones to form a government by themselves, but have themselves been in governments. In fact, both of these are in the government right now. And then all the tiny parties that have managed to make it into the parliament. And I'm going to start going through the major parties from left to right. That might not sound very intuitive to you, but there's a reason why I'm going to go through the parties in this order. So hold on tight. So one other key thing that you need to know about the Finnish political system before we start talking about the differences between different parties is that Finland, of course, is a welfare state. And generally, universally, people within Finland think that the welfare state system is a good system. However, it obviously comes with its problems, mainly where does the money come from to pay for all of our services. And the thing about Finnish politics is that a lot of it really just revolves around this one issue. But I want to stress here that while there might be some ideological differences between parties that I may forget to talk about, and you're free to yell at me in the comments afterwards, the bigger important ideological differences between the parties really does settle on how the Finnish welfare system is financed. So let's start with the big party on the left, which is the Social Democratic Party, or the SDP. The only one of these parties where their English and Finnish acronyms are actually the exact same. The SDP, as you can probably guess, it was considered traditionally the kind of urban workers' party. Historically, they had a pretty significant role in the Finnish Civil War as the heads of the Red Guard. And because of this, during the early years of Finnish independence, the SDP wasn't very popular with the other political parties, even though they did gain a lot of votes. And in fact, our current government is led by the SDP. So being on the left, you can probably guess that SDP is a big believer in social programs, and they are also a pretty pro-taxation party. Again, for some of you Anglophone viewers, that might sound like a weird policy to have. However, you should also understand that Finns are actually pretty happy taxpayers in the sense that we pay taxes quite happily because we understand that that's how things are paid for. And if there's any big criticism the SDP has, it's that it's maybe slightly viewed, especially by younger viewers, as a party controlled by a bunch of old dudes, even though the prime minister that replaced our previous prime minister actually looks like this. So that might be an image change that's still in the works. Some people also feel that the SDP is maybe a little too close to the labor unions, which of course does make sense. As you're going to find out throughout this video, there's a lot of general distrust towards the big parties in Finland. The big party in the center, of course, is the Center Party. They're kind of always traditionally been known as the kind of rural farmers' party. In fact, the party was originally called the Agrarian League. Now, being centrist, of course, means that the party believes in a kind of mishmash of both left and right-leaning ideals. Generally, I would consider them a little bit conservative, but not maybe conservative in the sense you're thinking of. You're going to find out very quickly that there is no traditionally conservative party in Finland as such. I mean that they're the kind of party that doesn't like to rock the boat very often. A key exception, though, might be our last Center Party Prime Minister, who went down as being probably one of the least popular Prime Ministers of recent memory. And because the Center Party is very happy to form a government with pretty much anybody else who happens to be in power at any time, there's this popular notion that the Center Party is the party that will inevitably always betray you. To be fair, there have been some pretty decent Center Party Prime Ministers in my view. But it does also appear that the Center Party is kind of the Slytherin house of the Finnish political system. That is to say that they have a tendency of breeding very power-hungry, despotic figures as well. The big party on the right is the National Coalition Party, or the NCP. The NCP is kind of traditionally thought of as, well, the urbanites party. And this is an image that they've actually tried very aggressively to fight against in the last 20 years, and to some degree they've actually been kind of successful. I should stress though that that stereotypical image has never actually stopped them from getting a lot of votes. Now, while the NCP is kind of the big party on the right, they don't have a lot of the same right-leaning values that you might associate with that word. Like I said, most of the political discourse in Finland tends to revolve around financing the Finnish welfare system. And the NCP is on the right in the sense that they believe more in cutting national expenses, but they also do recognize the value of the Finnish welfare system, and so they don't have like an initiative to try to break it down. If there's like a key buzzword that I would best associate with this particular party, it's the word entrepreneurship. So basically the NCP believes in cutting down Finnish bureaucracy so that it's actually easier for people to go to business for themselves, and as a result strengthen their income so they wouldn't be so reliant on the Finnish welfare system as a whole. And I do have to say that I actually do think the NCP does have a point. Finland does have this problem of being considered a bit of a bureaucratic hellhole. But at the same time, I've always been very leery of this whole entrepreneurship mantra that they keep spouting out. And the stereotypical image of the NCP politician is usually rich guys who lack empathy towards those who are not doing so well in life. And of course, the weird thing about all of these parties is that given the right circumstances, some of them can be forced to work together in ways that you probably wouldn't imagine. For instance, in the 90s, following a very unpopular run of center-led governments, Finland actually had a coalition government between the SDP and the NCP. Now, the SDP, Center and Coalition are obviously the three traditional big parties. But these days, political scientists also believe that Finland technically has four big parties, and the last of the four big parties that I'm going to talk about is the Finnish Party. Now, if you've read anything about the Finnish Party from international press, you've probably read that they are kind of Finland's racist extreme right party. And while that racist part is probably a little bit true, the extreme right part is technically not. Now, it's true that the Finnish Party is kind of Finland's only anti-immigration, anti-EU party, and it's true that in European politics, because despite the fact that they don't like the EU, they of course have to have representation in the European Parliament. They have been known to associate with the extreme right groups of other countries, which is what tends to happen when your policies are largely defined by you being anti-immigrant and anti-EU. However, policy-wise, once you start to look more into the Finnish Party manifesto, you start to realize that it's kind of this weird hodgepodge of both left and right-leaning ideas. In fact, the party, when it was formed originally in the late 90s, was actually a coalition of various smaller centrist parties, who nevertheless didn't like the Center Party very much. And the reason for this hodgepodginess of their party program is that you will start to notice that a lot of their politicians are in fact former members of the other big three parties. So the more accurate term that I would use to describe the Finnish Party is that they are a populist party. That is to say, they're a party that attracts people who have become disenchanted with the other big three parties. It is true that because of their anti-immigrant stance, they probably do garner a lot of votes from various racist individuals. Due to the sheer size of the party's voting base, it's hard for me to believe that that's the only reason they've become as big as they have. And note that I'm not particularly a big fan of the Finnish Party myself, but another thing that shows what a big party they've become is the fact that during the previous government, the party actually went through a notable schism. That is to say that the MPs of the Finnish Party who were in the government ended up leaving the party, and now none of those MPs are in the parliament anymore. Next up we come to the mid-range parties, and both of these are broadly left-leaning parties, which are the Green Party and the Left Alliance. Now let's start with the Left Alliance because that one is a bit easier to explain. The Left Alliance was probably formed in the late 80s as a coalition of various left-leaning groups that, as you can probably guess, because they're not part of the big party on the left, or that is to say the SDP, these parties decided to come together because they felt that the SDP's policies weren't left enough and had become more centralized in some way. So as you can probably guess, the Left Alliance is a big believer in the social programs and also generally improving the employment opportunities of people of various social standings. The Left Alliance has been experiencing a large boost in popularity, helped along no doubt by the fact that their leader is probably the most popular politician in Finland right now, even more popular than our current Prime Minister. The Green Party, as you can guess, is Finland's environmental party, although that's a badge that is becoming increasingly less unique in Finnish politics. The Green Party's popularity has ebbed and flowed hard over the years. In the 90s, they were considered kind of a big deal because at the time, none of the other parties really had very well-established environmental programs. However, these days, almost all of the major parties do have some kind of an environmental program, which is why the Green Party is no longer as unique in its ideals as you might think. In recent years, the party's popularity, though, has grown, especially with younger voters. This despite the fact that the party has kind of had a hard time maintaining steady leadership. The Green and Left parties are actually so close value-wise that I've even heard some people wonder about why these two mid-range parties don't just unite and basically form a second big left party to challenge or even possibly replace the SDP. And I myself can't even come up with a good reason why they wouldn't. The most I can probably gather is that the Left Alliance probably still views the Green Party as being not left-leaning enough. The Left Alliance doesn't have a particularly strong environmental program, even though I'm sure they'd have one as well. And also, while environmental issues are clearly more of the Green Party's thing, the Left Alliance has also become kind of known as the leading feminist party in Finland, which is kind of a huge blow for, you know, Finland's feminist party. Then we come to the smaller fringe parties that have managed to make it into the parliament. And we start with the party which, despite being small, always gets a consistently pretty high vote for most of these small parties. And that's the Swedish People's Party. The Swedish People's Party, of course, exists primarily to represent Finland's Swedish-speaking minority, of course, Swedish being Finland's second official language, which explains why they generally garner a very steady percentage of the vote, and which is also why, despite being such a small party, historically they have almost always been in the government, with the most recent exception being our previous central-led government, which probably had something to do with the fact that the Finnish Party was in it. And I wish I had something else to say about the Swedish People's Party. They are broadly right-leaning, which is to say they're a bit closer to the NCP than maybe the other parties, but they're in the government right now with the SDP. Members of the Swedish People's Party, though, are pretty well liked, which is why many of them have held minister positions in the past. But as a party overall, they're kind of vanilla. There's really nothing hugely exciting about them. So we move on next to the Christian Democrats. Now, like I said, Finland really doesn't have a traditional conservative party, except maybe if you want to count the Christian Democrats, who are in part Finnish Lutheran members, but also members of other Christian sects throughout the country. And the most noteworthy thing about this party is that they are pretty much Finland's only anti-gay party. That is to say that they are pretty much the only Finnish party that represents conservative family values, and they have generally never been a particularly great influence on Finnish politics. As a card-carrying Lutheran, they always manage to get my blood boiling. I seriously tried to look up some policies about this party that would not make it seem like they aren't just an awful organization. And I suppose their market policies are somewhat okay-ish, but the more you look into the Christian Democrats, the less they start to seem like an actual political party and more like some kind of a crazy cult. Which is why it's better to move on to the last party, which is the Movement Now. The Movement Now is one of these small parties that have become very popular in Finland and also other parts of the world, where well-known politicians from other parties decide to form a party around themselves, most often when they realize that they are no longer the center of attention in their own parties. Finland had several of these form in the recent election as well, and the Movement Now is the only one that actually managed to garner enough support to gain one seat in the Finnish Parliament. And to be fair, I think those votes were garnered more by the individual running than their actual policies. The individual being Jallis Harkimo, who used to be a big deal in the world of Finnish ice hockey, and who was formerly an NCP member until he decided to form his own party. And as tends to be the case with these small split faction parties, the Movement Now is really nothing more than NCP 2.0 that markets itself as being better than the real NCP. But considering how many members they have in the parliament right now, they are unlikely to sway many votes in the near future. Now there you go, off the top of my head, the best summary I could possibly give of all these parties. And even though I tried very hard not to give my own political opinions on this particular video, I'm sure some of it slipped in. So anyway, I'm not gonna ask which parties you vote for because I really don't want to know. But if I did present some incorrect info in this video, I would appreciate you correcting them here. And if I made enough mistakes, I might make that into its own video. But the next video in this particular topic, I hope to make a little bit more entertaining and interesting, and not so much a classroom presentation on the political parties. I'm TheHande's, see you on the next one.